So this is the second part of the diagnosis of Fleet Street newspapers of Friday the 21st of August 2020. Now this is the update of the news that we mentioned about the likelihood of an extension of the ban on evictions, which has been staged. The continuation of the ban has been extended beyond 23rd of August, which is 2 days from now. It was supposed to have ended on Sunday, the 23rd of August 2020, enabling the private sector landlords to evict tenants and create an additional wave and mayhem in the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in Britain. Now, given that hundreds of thousands of people, the most of whom are white people, are being denied basic human rights to housing, how important is it to raise the question, what then is the chance or the likelihood that a non-white person from Sudan would get any housing rights or any rights to their humanity if they got here as refugees? So that is a question which goes straight back to what I said in January 1992 in my broadcast on the Channel 4 News slot, which I had written and presented, calling on Western governments, European governments in essence, imperialist governments of countries that were running empires in Africa and Asia, to address the dire situation that prevailed in Africa and Asia in terms of the lack of basic economic sustainability and the lack of basic access to food and shelter for millions of people. And I said that, pegging it to the United Nations General Assembly, which was due to meet in January, and almost on the eve of then General Assembly President UK and its then Prime Minister John Major about to fly to New York and to address the United Nations. And I warned him. I said to John Major, and through him, and I said in that broadcast in the mainstream television in 1992, 28 years ago, that if these Western governments and countries failed or refused to deal with the crisis of poverty, hunger, famine, starvation that dominated so many countries in Africa and Asia, then the nightmare spectacle of millions of people wanting to find refuges in the West would become unstoppable. Now, what we have seen in the last nearly 3 weeks of hate revived against the refugees seeking refuges in Britain is only a tip of the iceberg of what I warned about 28 years ago. Now, this person who is pictured as the victim who died in drowning while trying to cross the channel, this person was reported to be a 16-year-old Sudanese at the time, like in the last 48 hours. But it is being reported today that he is actually he was actually 28 years old. He was Sudanese, but he was not 16 years old, and he was a person that didn't know how to swim. And it is a very personal, extremely personal, very personal tragedy for him. And his name is being given as Abdul Fattah Hamdallah. And quite a few things about him. His Facebook, which was last updated in June, and what he told a cousin just before the fateful attempt to cross the channel. These are very uncanny. I mean, there were telltale signs about what probably is a kind of premonition he had. So this 28-year-old Sudanese had a very long kind of experience with adversity back in Sudan and on the way to this drowning 2 days ago. And the details are, of course, summarized in the piece in The Guardian. And he had also been desperate when he got the latest rejection by the French. They refused his application for refuge there. He didn't know how to swim. Now, it is unthinkable how somebody who knew he didn't know how to swim, would take a risk of crossing the channel in a dinghy that is completely unreliable. And he bought it in a shop in Calais, in the French town, where the nearest kind of town to the shore, from where most people attempting to cross the channel kind of start their journey through the waters. Now, this item in The Guardian gives his story, the map and everything, all the various countries he came through. This is the day when the UK housing minister, or the minister in the Boris Johnson fronted cabinet, in the name of housing or at the expense of housing, has been forced to stage a miniature U-turn and extend a ban on court proceedings on evictions, extended by another 3 weeks or so, up to the 20th of September. Whereas in Scotland, the ban has been extended up to March 2021 at least. That is a significant number of months more than the Robert Jenrick extension, which has been, as I predicted earlier, before this news was confirmed, that he would do that because they have got too many items of dysfunctioning by this so-called government. And as I said, the dysfunctioning is epitomized, embodied in, personified by Boris Johnson, who I said in the previous edition, is being allowed to fail and be incompetent and completely, absolutely dysfunctional as compared to the last Labour Prime Minister in the 1970s, who had been pilloried by the same Fleet Street for saying, crisis, what crisis? Now, Boris Johnson has said 1,000 times more and more substantially dangerous, irresponsible things than James Callaghan had said in the 70s. And this is even the Daily Mail, which is one of the kind of house journals of the right-wing conservative Brexiteers in this country. Now, the evidence is so compelling that they cannot, quite apart from the fact that they are winning in that kind of display, the circulation war against the rival, the nearest rival, which is the Murdoch own son. And the evidence is so compelling that even they had to publish this absolute disaster of a Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. I mean, the phrase taking back control, he has no idea about the control. So we've got, the Guardian has got this Sudanese victims picture, one picture, and this is the Daily Mail, which we showed in the morning, earlier edition. But this is the one that they're running. And their headline is Heart-Rending Words of Friends Who Watched the Nightmare Unfold. So this is another one. So the context is juxtaposing this with the evictions faced by white people, not refugees, hundreds of thousands of white people. In fact, the lack of housing rights is a reality for anything between 8 to 12 million people in Britain, and almost 80%, 90% of them are white people, indigenous white people, not refugees. So, how is it that so many millions are denied basic human rights, basic housing rights, basic economic rights in this country by their own patriotic English or British government? So, going back to the question of hunger and famine, ending the hunger and famine at root, I said in 1992, in January 1992, I told John Major, I told the whole world in that broadcast that the world would see unprecedented surge in the demand for spaces, shelter, refuge in the West by people from Africa and Asia. 28 years. And no government has taken any action to address the very clearly set out and clearly predictable, evidentially predictable crisis that I had outlined, including the United Nations. So we shall continue with this commentary and this narrative in the coming broadcasts and videos. But the essential fact is that the United Nations, as I said in the previous edition, has become a denier, a breaker of the very United Nations charters and the conventions and the treaties that were spawned by those charters and conventions to uphold human rights, to protect people like this particular victim from Sudan from the fates that he met and other fates, that so many other violations attend their lives on the way to seeking refuge. And in the words of the Daily Mail's chief anti-migrant racist investigative reporter Sue Reed, land of gold. London is the land of gold. London is the ultimate, London meaning the UK, Britain. So the United Nations is failing, and the French government is behaving in breach of its duties and without compassion, despite the fact that in his over promoted visit to Lebanon after the explosion, the president, the current president of France, Macron, was shown as being a personification of compassion and solidarity to the ex-French colonist people in Lebanon. This same government, fronted by Macron, refused this 28-year-old his application, forcing him to become absolutely desperate and risk his life. He even, the premonition, or maybe he even gave up on living, so took the risk, knowing the risk was too high. So the French government denied that what Priti Patel said, that the French was a racist country, because Priti Patel quoted some or referred to some migrants who told the British Home Office or the British quote rescuers that the French were behaving in a prejudiced, racist way, refusing them help and support, and the hostility created around what was called the Calais migrant camp and other nearby Sangatte and other places. The hostility is nothing but unconcealed, racist, organized, orchestrated violations and obstacles created against the African and Asian migrants feeling in any way safe in France. And this is something that the British media hype about large numbers, 5,000, 4,000, whatever, reaching this country so far already. They don't mention this. So these are human beings, and as can be seen from the pictures that the Daily Mail and the Guardian are carrying today, Friday the 21st of August 2020. Here was a very determined young person, determined to reach a place where he could settle down and live a decent human life after such a long experience of misery and threat and violation and violence all the way in Sudan as well as on the way from Sudan. And Sudanese, and there was a genocide. In the last 20 years, there has been a genocide of one group of Sudanese by another group that was in power. So genocide is not only committed at the instigation of the Western war creators, but internally as well. And again, genocide is not being treated in anywhere as urgently or as being such a desperate violation of human lives as compared to the references to other genocides, especially the behavior of Hitler's Nazi party government against the targets of genocide, mainly identified as people of the Jewish original Jewish background, but they also murdered and massacred homosexuals or gays and other minorities that people have not been actually given the full impact information on. That is why the concentration has been, or the attention has been, concentration is the wrong word, the attention has been mainly focused around the plight of the Jewish people. But there were other people who were not Jewish who were murdered and massacred and genocided by the Nazis in Germany. And genocides have been taking place ever since, or at least they started not long after the end of the so-called Second World War that defeated the Nazis in Germany. And despite the fact that the United Nations was founded to prevent what happened before the end of the Second World War. All these wars and massacres and genocides have been going on to such a point where the United Nations HCR has now become complicit with a number of regimes that are actively engaged in violating the founding charter and founding conventions and the resulting treaties of the United Nations. So, while the refugees' status and the claim and entitlement is so dire before they come here, it is quite inevitable that when they come here, they will not be given anything like the rights that they have been told that will be available for them in this country. And there was another refugee who was physically attacked immediately after he got on land. So anyone who observed the hysteric racist campaign based on a fear of migrants and the fear of Muslims coming to this country just before the 2016, June 2016 referendum for Brexit would have known that the Brexit was a cover. It was a racist war. It was an anti-Muslim war being fought waged by the racists and anti-Muslims in this country in league with their co-racists and co-haters of Muslims in many parts of the Western European continent or subcontinent. And of course, they drew direct encouragement from Donald Trump, who launched his campaign openly declaring himself as someone who would stop Muslims coming to the USA. So it's not like I am interpreting some hidden message. It is brazen. It is absolutely the most brazen declaration of darkness. So I have been saying that what has been happening in these countries, in the UK with the racists and the Brexiteers, and in the USA with the Trump and his Steve Bannon. We shall have an updating note on Bannon in a few minutes. Has been open invitation to dark age, something like centuries before what happened. And what Joe Biden has said reportedly in his speech to the Republican National Convention is that he hopes to bring America out of the darkness. That is at last the correct phrase, the correct phraseology, the correct semantic, the correct rhetoric. It is the darkness. And the darkness in the USA that was last seen several hundred years ago. That's what has been revived by Trump. And that's what has been imitated by Johnson, Farage, and others in Britain. And it is widely reported, and now it is widely accepted, evidentially, that the encouragement to these right-wing, anti-Muslim haters and inciters has been significantly fueled by the regime fronted by and controlled by Vladimir Putin in Russia, which is not the same thing as the USSR, even taking into account the various things that George Stalin did and others. USSR was in many ways still aligned with some kind of socialist aims. And of course, it failed because of Stalin and others, as Solzhenitsyn has chronicled. But the Russia fronted by Putin is a billion miles away from socialist republic, however imperfect that was. So Putin, although Russian, has been behaving as if he has been one of the Western European racist politicians. This is something that is historically absolutely significant, because Russian statespersons or politicians have hardly been compared or hardly behaved in a way that is comparable or has been comparable to the behavior of their Western European adversaries. But Putin has broken that kind of barrier and has become one of the main funders of the darkest forces of racism and anti-Muslim hatred and instability in the world. Now, why he is doing that is a very significant question, and we shall be exploring the answer or the evidence in due course. But essentially, what is happening is that there is no real moral difference between what is Russian politically and what is British and what is American politically. And these are the forces that are also controlling. Russia is, on the one hand, and America and Britain and France, broadly on the other hand, they are engaged in maintaining and fueling and funding and arming wars and genocide and massacres, which are the reasons why the Sudanese, 28-year-old Sudanese, and others are risking their lives and getting killed in the process. They should not be put in this position. And for 28 years, I have been watching the behavior of these politicians, and no one has said what I said. No one has said in the 28 years, none of the statespersons or none of the ministers, prime ministers, presidents in place has said anything like, I only did that broadcast which lasted 3 minutes or so on Channel 4 News slot in January 1992. But those 3 minutes contained more substance, evidence, universality, practicality about ending hunger and ending the need to migrate and need to become immigrants in the West or in Western countries. So the task is not done. We have to continue. And I'm saying this because if Jenrick is so reluctant to help the people threatened with losing their homes, then it goes without saying that he would not be enthusiastic about helping migrants and refugees. And he isn't. So the migrants and the refugees, quite apart from the fact that they know their circumstances, why they are impelled to leave their homes and countries, they need a service worldwide, internationally conducted service of practical, real, moral, and practical, political, social, economic education. The United Nations is not doing that. It's not delivering that. So I'm saying that we have to create a movement, a forum, a service that provides that information to hundreds, millions of people and saves the planet in the process. Not only in terms of social discord and in terms of the social disharmony and human rights violation and others, but also the planet itself needs saving, and it is beyond calculation. The benefits, the savings in terms of the economic saving, the monetary saving is beyond calculation, and it will not ever be matched by 1,000 Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk. These are boasting of being billionaires, but their billions are as nothing compared to the damage and destruction that is being caused to the planet and to the human beings, human and animals and the plants. So the saving will be worth thousands of trillions to the world. That is how important it is to stop hunger at root and to stop violation of human rights at root. And the actual battle against the violations in Britain, in the context of Britain, which is overly zombified and too many gullible people wait for the disaster to hit them before they begin to realize just how stupidly they have been treated by their own so-called government. There should never have been a housing crisis, anything like what is being caused now and what is being experienced now. But housing crisis should never have been affecting even 5% of the population. But the housing crisis affects anything between 20 to 30% of the population in the UK constantly. And that is the worst kind of housing crisis. And those are in tandem with the crisis in social care and in health care and in education, in employment, in economic as well as social stability and dignity. How is it that this country has come to this pass and it is getting worse? Today's news is that the UK has got, for the first time, the public borrowing has surpassed or exceeded 2 trillion pounds. Now, in April 2010, the sum was 1 trillion pounds, which was just weeks before the last Labour-fronted government was ousted by the Tories under the severe combination of the severe incompetence by the Labour government in upholding the principles and the values that Gordon Brown so completely falsely boasted about, and the fact that the Tories were waiting to grab hold of the levers of exploitation and profit and the over-exploitation of the surplus value that Charlie Marx so correctly pointed out and articulated. Now, the fact that Britain has reached or gone past the 2 trillion pound public borrowing or debt is clear sign that in the months to come, in the years to come, the British society and economy will only get worse, and it will not be rescued by Keir Starmer, who significantly got an endorsement from John MacDonald, who certified that Keir Starmer is a socialist. We shall diagnose and dissect that falsehood in due course, not in this edition, but in later editions. Now, the fact that there is the pandemic, which Boris Johnson has completely wrongly kind of neglected and allowed thousands of people to die. It is going to get worse because of what they're doing contradictorily every single day and every single hour, especially by using the pandemic to distribute various business contracts among themselves, like what's it, Dido, Harding, and others of her completely corrupt and dysfunctioning ilk. So these stories, instead of governing society and protecting people and providing good health protection, they are busy distributing the loots. And even though it is $2 trillion, £3 trillion debt, that debt is made of hundreds of millions of pounds they have distributed among themselves. Borrowed money, but they have been stealing the money among themselves. So this is something, this analysis must be understood as the uniquely. There is no way that the newspapers are going to say that. There is no way that the BBC is going to say that. There is a little kind of competition between ITV and the BBC. And the BBC is announcing that they're going to discontinue broadcasting on the standard television platform, and their output is going to be mainly viewable and accessible online and related kind of platforms and devices and modes. ITB has declared immediately that they are not going to change and they're not going to follow the BBC's announced plan. And so therefore they say that the death of television news is greatly exaggerated. That is a pun based on a person called Barton Russell, who was reportedly said that the report of his death was exaggerated because while he was alive, it was reported that he was dead. He was probably visiting Japan or some other country. So we have got a crisis at home, and the immediate threat posed to people without any homes is not being actually ended by Jenrick announcing the 3 weeks extension to the permanent ban on eviction court proceedings. And it is likely that before the 3 weeks are out, there would be such pressure even among people who are conservative MPs and their constituents are included among the people who are going to be violated by the resumption of eviction court proceedings. The Jenrick will further extend it and he will match the length of time that Scotland has already announced up to March 2021. If incompetence, lack of attention, and rampant corruption and dishonesty in handling or mishandling the pandemic, in robbing the children of their grades by the bogus use of algorithm, and if the dishonestly staged extension of the ban on evictions, if these are not evidence, then there is evidence of incompetence, corruption, and lying and stealing and giving contracts by the latest news about Crossrail. Anyone who knows what Khoodeelaar campaign is, Khoodeelaar campaign is actually the campaign that began in December 2003 with the main aim of stopping the Crossrail plot to dig a hole, a mile deep hole in the middle of Brick Lane. So the Crossrail, not only the hole, but the rest of the Crossrail propaganda and the narrative based on similar narrative of big business contractors intent on looting the public, that is now being seen on HS2 high speed 2. So we said that Crossrail was being pushed, being controlled by big business forces. And we said that in 2003, December 2003, and we have been saying it for 17 years. Now there is a latest delay. Instead of Crossrail starting in 2018, which is what they said it would become operational, it is now going to be delayed until 2022. And they are saying in the Evening Standard, which is one of the main peddlers of Crossrail throughout the years of our campaign against it, it's saying that its budget is going to get up to 18 billion. They had said initially it was single figure budget, like 9 billion, 8 billion, or whatever. And it has been accelerating ever since, with the accelerated delays, the accelerated incompetence. But one of the vested interests involved in the Crossrail project is saying in the Evening Standard or Evening No Standard that they are determined to get it right. So even if there is a delay, they want to make sure it is right once it gets going. Just like the news that television news has been, the death of television news has been greatly exaggerated. The importance of high-speed railway, especially in London, is completely over-exaggerated, because there is no sustainable economic, environmental argument for expediting or making the train speedier, faster by a few minutes. Absolutely makes no sense. And yet that has been the driving kind of banner in the propaganda for high-speed railway transport in this country. And the propaganda and the hype comes from the big business contractors who want to have their hands on the billions of pounds that they can actually pocket under these contracts. I said throughout the campaign opposing the Crossrail whole plot that the existing railway infrastructure in London was in dire need of severe repair, thorough repair and overhaul. Now, that infrastructure remains neglected as we speak, 17 years on. And if the existing infrastructure is not made safe, then many disasters will take place because they are not safe, they are rotting, they are in unsafe conditions. So for safety's sake, they should have been attending the many, there are literally hundreds of miles of underground and overground railways in and around London, which need to be refurbished, repaired, and made safe, which cannot be done by launching a completely separate line like Crossrail. So that is illogical, and that is irrational, and that is impractical, and that is unsafe. And no platform, no media said that. I have said it. And I'm continuing to say this. In fact, the main acknowledged railway expert or experts, a few of them, have not said it. So I'm the one who's saying it because I have done the study and I have done the observation. And it is absolutely worth not 18 billion, it is worth hundreds of billions of pounds worth of savings if they address this, and it would not cost hundreds of billions. So that is the stupidity of the successive regimes at the city hall, so-called, the mayor, whoever the mayor has been, and at the central government levels. So the decline of the image, the reality of Britain as an efficient country, as a democratic country, as a compassionate country, as an economically sustainable country, it is going down, vaporing, disappearing. And there is no sign that it will be reversed. So those of us who are not part of the central government opportunistic, careeristic kind of engagements or installations, we have the duty to look out for society, look out for the environment, look out for human rights here and internationally. So the newspapers are not up to the task. They are doing the superficial reporting. They are not doing the in-depth, deeper, factual, fact-based, truthful reporting. They are not doing it today, that they have not done in the last 70 years since the foundation, 73 years ago, of the United Nations. And they will not be changing their behavior in the foreseeable future. So the media, the mainstream media, the newspapers are as bad as the regimes that they have been supporting and covering up for. And the majority of the people are gullibles, brainwashed, subliminally and directly and otherwise. And so there is a whole lot of serious deficiencies in this society, which is why so many problems persist, and there is no proper commitment to defending the idea of a national health service that delivers health service at the point of need. And the same case with the schools, same case with the universities, the education. And all of these combined create the increasing magnitude of public debt. Now, just past this week, news, £2 trillion. So we have a very long, heavy list of tasks to undertake to defend our rights and the society itself as a whole.